Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to welcome back to the show, and it's been too long, Ezra Levin. He's the co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible Project, leads a national staff supporting thousands of local indivisible groups around the nation, fighting the good fight at all times. Ezra, good to see you, my friend. We haven't talked in a couple of years, honestly. I thought we had won, but you're back. We're back. We've been here. We've all been fighting, but it's good to have you back on.
Great to be here. I wish was under better circumstances, Dean, but good to be talking with a fellow traveler.
I think that should just be trademarked by Democrats. I should So, you have a new Resistance 2.0, and I've been talking about Resistance 2.0 a lot on my show. So when I saw the manual, I'm like, we've got to get you on.
Mm.
And you write, just so people know, we just can't repeat the 2017 playbook. And while it was successful in 2017 and 2018 in getting the House back, and that was a big time when we were talking a lot,
Yep.
more needs to be done going forward. But let me
That's right.
ask you first of all, because and it's a great read, the manual. It's online. It's not very long. People can read it over the holidays if you want. Um,
Mhm.
when you look back at the loss of 2024, let's start there. What are the lessons you take away as we look forward to winning in the future?
Yeah. Well, look, I was optimistic about 2024. I was
Mhm.
optimistic based on what I was seeing on the ground. I traveled all over the country to battleground districts, and one thing that you saw on the ground when you're talking to actual volunteers who were knocking on doors or doing postcards or sending text was they would ask, where are the Republican canvassers? Where is their lid? It's nowhere to be seen. We are wiping the floor with them. They are just not out there. And so you got this sense if you were out in battleground states that we were just running away with this. Our ground
Right.
game was so superior. And come to, I mean, obviously it didn't turn out the way we wanted it to. There were seven battleground states for the Electoral College, and we didn't win a single one of them.
Yep.
And overall, there was about a 7 point swing against us in non-battleground states. But in battleground states, there was as little as a 1.5 point swing against us, or as much as five or a little bit more, which is to say, the ground game was indeed closing the gap. It just wasn't enough. It was not enough to overcome not just a national swing against incumbents, but a global swing. In 120 years of democracies holding elections, this is the first year in history where every single incumbent party, regardless of ideology, regardless of geography, regardless of time in office, they lost power. And so there is this global anti-incumbent swing that's occurring right now that we were able to close some of the gap, but not enough. There are a lot of lessons that we should take from this. One of them is we don't know yet all of the lessons that we're going to have to take from this. The
Hmm.
data that's specific to demographic groups or geographies or campaign messaging tactics, we don't have it all yet. We don't have it all yet. There are some things we can say. We can say, for instance, that, had Merrick Garland actually pursued a prosecution of Donald Trump on a timeline that was reasonable to achieve justice, maybe we wouldn't have been in this position in the first place. We can say that very clearly, as disappointed as folks were with Donald Trump's leadership as president, and as much as they didn't support Project 2025 or his attempt to push us into fascism generally, we can see they were not happy with the status quo. They were very upset with inflation. There needed to be some clear break, and we were not able to present that break. It wasn't enough to just shift to Kamala Harris. Still, the public associated her with, well, this is the status quo, and I'm against the status quo. I don't care what the alternative is. Now, that said, going forward, we're not going to just fight the last war. We have a new battle. We have a new
Right.
political reality. We have lost the House. We've lost the Senate. We've lost the presidency. That sucks. That sucks. It means a lot of damage is going to be done and there's going to be a lot of harm. It does not mean that democracy is over, though. It means we need to adjust to this new reality, identify where we have leverage and power, and fight every single inch of the way to reduce harm and rebuild that power.
I could not agree with you more. And, in the new manual, you write that rejection of the status quo, not an embrace of fascism, is the way you look at this election.
Yeah.
And it's true that, look, while some people, it gets the headlines when nations are moving to the right or they have people on a runoff on the right. In the UK, the Conservative Party was there forever. The Labour Party, first time in over a decade, huge win. And it was just a rejection of the status quo. And I'd
Right.
even argue that Trump's first loss was because of COVID. So that was the beginning of this process. Like people were like didn't like who was handling COVID, and then didn't like the post-COVID time as well for various reasons. And here we are. So That's an important point that you make, that this is not an embrace of fascism. I don't think the average person's like, let me give fascism a chance. I honestly don't think that's
No,
percolating to most people
they didn't
voting.
like the price of eggs. They didn't
Right.
like the price of groceries. They didn't say, oh, suddenly I want fluoride out of the water. Suddenly I want the Affordable Care Act repealed. Suddenly I want Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Yeah, there are millions of MAGAs out there who were voting for that. But the marginal voters who made the difference in this election, who threw the election to Trump, they were not voting for those things. And that should give us encouragement, right? That should make, because if they were voting for fascism, okay, game over. They're going to move forward. They have the mandate. But no,
Right.
instead, they were voting for something specific, which was an end to the status quo and to make their lives materially better. And what we know about Trump and his appointees and the folks he's bringing in with him, they are reading this as a mandate for something they do not have a mandate to do, which means a backlash is coming. A backlash is coming. And the question in front of all of us now is, okay, how do we take that disappointment and sense of betrayal that is going to come based on the agenda that these folks are going to try to push forward? How do we take that and turn it to our advantage to make sure that we limit harm and take back power?
And I think, interesting, you just mentioned Matt Gaetz, who, because of the overwhelming pushback by even Republicans, he drops out. Trump doesn't even lash out. His statement was like, I wish Matt well. There was no rhinos, there was no fake news. And I'm like, this is very interesting. Trump
Yeah.
understands his capital is not infinite, that he was not going to waste it on him. And he ended up might not waste it on Pete Hegseth if it continues for Secretary of Defense. We'll see on that one. I think he might be a little bit more engaged in that, but it's hard to say. But what's your takeaway, that he didn't put up a big fight for Matt Gaetz?
Well, so I hope the early takeaway right now is Trump is not invincible,
Right.
that the MAGA movement is not omnipotent, that yes, the Republican Party has won a big election, no doubt about it. And that gives them agenda setting power. They have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They get to say what we're talking about on any given week at the national level. That's what they've won. But it does not mean that they get to win. Yes, Matt Gaetz, look, the Fed Chair Powell has refused to resign and isn't going
Hmm.
to let Trump fire him. We've got senators choosing Thune, who's not my favorite guy, but at least he's not Trump's pick over who's Trump's pick was to lead the Senate.
Hmm.
We've got senators saying that they're not going to go along with recess appointments. We've got HR 9495 that we can talk about, this attempt to increase Trump's power, being beaten back by House Democrats, and I hope ultimately being beaten back by Senate Democrats. So we have a lot of early signs that, yes, Trump and his cohort, they're going to overreach. They're going to try to do extreme things, but we can beat them. They are beatable. They're not going to be able to get everything done. And that was our lesson when we wrote the original Indivisible guide about the Tea Party fighting Obama. The Tea Party didn't entirely end the Obama presidency or all the legislation he tried to get through, but they slowed a lot down and they prevented him from getting a lot done. Indivisible and the broader resistance movement in 2017, we didn't stop everything that Trump tried to get done. He did a terrible tax cut bill that cut taxes for billionaires and millionaires and his donors and corporations. Uh, he got that through, but he didn't repeal the Affordable Care Act. He
Right.
he didn't entirely get rid of elections in this country. We were able to actually continue as a democracy. So I hope the message people take from all of this is we can win some. We got to organize, but we can indeed win some.
Yes, and I vividly remember talking, probably with you, but people from your organization, other grassroots groups fighting against the ACA repeal. And they had all the cards. They could have done it. And John McCain famously was the key. Another Republican senator, if I remember correctly, also voted against it. But that was the thumb down that
Well, so
changed it.
that's right. They had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Their top legislative priority going into 2017 was repealing the Affordable
Mhm.
Care Act. It took them weeks and weeks to get it through the House because they couldn't get the votes. They couldn't get the votes, even the House, which they should have been able to get done. They eventually do get it. They have this photo op of all these white men laughing and celebrating at the White House with
I
Trump,
remember.
and then it goes to the Senate, and the theory was you've got Mitch McConnell leading the Senate. My God, Mitch McConnell, what a villain. What an incredible operator. He can get anything through the Senate. He's going to get this done. And I know famously John McCain did that famous thumbs down to kill it. But actually, this was a months long fight where throughout this fight, we got a different collection of Republican and Democratic senators saying no. Jerry Moran in Kansas, we had several hundred Indivisible members out in Palco, Kansas,
Wow.
Jerry Moran town hall saying, "Do not repeal the ACA." And it was one of these intermediate parts of the fight. It wasn't the final one, but it was this stage of the fight where we needed to slow things down. And Jerry Moran raised some concerns, and so they weren't able to bulldoze through. So yes, at the end of the day, it was Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and John McCain who voted no. That killed it in that final stage. But it was a long, dragged out fight, and we fought every step of the way. And the result of it is millions and millions of people kept their health insurance.
Very, and it helped people. I mean, there were people calling the show crying because they had children who had dire pre-existing conditions that they knew if you get rid of
That's
the
right.
ACA, they can never afford coverage for their kids, or they would have gone bankrupt providing it. And they would have gladly gone bankrupt for their child, but no one should be put in that position. So I was so happy when it stopped it. So let's talk about, before we talk about 2.0 resistance,
Yeah.
what are the lessons from 1.0? Because I think everyone's familiar with that. And you just reminded us a little bit. What are the lessons from that are still applicable going forward now?
So some things are similar to 2016, 2017. Again, we have lost the House, the Senate, and the presidency. There is a Republican trifecta at the national level. And I mentioned this earlier. That means they have earned the right to set the agenda. Trump and congressional leadership, Republican congressional leadership, get to say, this is the bill we're voting on today or this week. This is the administrative action that I'm taking. They get to do that. So that forces us into a defensive posture, similar to 2017. They are going to set the agenda and we are going to have to respond in some way. That is the same right now at the national level. Another thing that is the same is we still have a federated republic where you have a representative and two senators. Those are your voice in Washington. You might
Right.
hate them, you might love them, you might think they're mediocre. Doesn't matter. They are your voice in Washington. So you might see them and think, oh, well, there's nothing they're going to do for me, or they're already on the right side. Therefore, I'm going to focus on X other senator or X other representative because I think they can be pushed. Unless you're rich or famous, those senators, those representatives do not care what you think. Because the way our democracy is constructed is that they are elected, the representative is elected to represent their 700,000 or so constituents, and the senators are elected to represent the constituents in their state. When I was a congressional staffer, we had a special place where we filed communications that came in from out of district. It was called the trash can because we did not care what non-constituents think. That's not a knock on representatives or senators.
Right.
That's literally how our democracy is structured. So when you're thinking about how to organize in this moment, I hope you were thinking about how do we defend in this moment? Good ideas for proactive policy, the future of the Democratic Party, what we're going to get done in 2032. Somebody should be having those conversations. But for this moment, right now, we got to defend. And the best way to defend is to identify who is your own elected official and how can you push them. And the last thing I'll say, as I mentioned, unless you're rich or famous, you as an individual have very little power out. You have no power outside your district. But even within your district, your unit of activism should not just be you individually. You should be organizing locally. We've had about 100 new indivisible groups formed since the election. These are
Wow.
normal volunteers who said, oh, I guess I got to do something. And now they've formed new indivisible groups that are volunteer run to focus on their elected officials. So finding your own community where you are is still the best way to build and wield the power that you have.
I'm chatting with Ezra Levin, the co-founder and co-executive director of the Indivisible Project. So that's great. You already have all these new organizations because I was going to ask you, because you deal with grassroots activists.
Yeah.
And what are you hearing in terms of, are some checking out or some just saying, look, I need time to recharge? Or is it like you just answered, you already have 100 new clubs, but what's the plus minus? Like, how does it go? How many have left? How many new people are coming in? What are you seeing?
Oh, well, so any people powered movement, there's constant churn. The
Right.
question is, I mean, there are new people starting, there are people who get burned out and they leave. The question is, are you building capacity over time? And over the course of the last 8 years of doing Indivisible, it's never a straight line up or a straight line down. It's
Right.
spiky. Growth happens spiky. There's a fight over the Affordable Care Act. Boom, a lot of people are showing up. There's a fight over family separation. Boom, a lot of people are showing up. You lose this election. Boom, a lot of people are showing up. The question in those moments when new people are paying attention is, can you start building power in that moment, or do they lift their head up and then put it back down? So the point of forming local indivisible groups is partly to wield power at the local level and focus on elected officials. But the other reason for that is because for folks who do want to be part of pushing back, there needs to be an accessible way for them to be part of this fight. And if it's just a big national online petition that doesn't seem to go anywhere, or there are big global ramifications of a Trump agenda, you can't wrap your arm around that. That's
Right.
too much for any individual. But that's why we have Indivisible New Braunfels in Texas that just formed down the street from where I am. Indivisible, I'm looking at a list, West Hills in California. Indivisible Wyoming just formed. Indivisible River Voices in New York. Janesville Indivisible in Wisconsin. These have all formed in the last few weeks in since the election. So these are folks who are saying to themselves, I guess I've got to do something. They're raising their hand, they're starting a first meeting, they're identifying who their elected officials are and where they have leverage, and they're starting to build. That's the recipe. If I have one word to
Mhm.
describe what I'm hearing from Indivisibles since the election, and to be clear, I've heard from a lot of Indivisible group leaders. We had a call with 11,000 people the day after the election. When we launched the guide, we had about 40,000 people on. I did a training with 700 new group leaders last week. I have another one this afternoon with new group
Wow.
leaders. So there is a lot. If I hear one word, though, it came from the statewide Indivisible gathering of Georgia group leaders right after the election. It was the weekend after the election. We were in a cabin in West Virginia writing the guide, me and Leah, my spouse, and the co-executive director of Indivisible. But I joined the statewide of Georgia. And they had done a poll at the beginning of this meeting asking how people felt. And as you can imagine, this is a few days after the election, people were feeling a lot of feelings. But number
Sure.
one feeling that they felt, 70% said determined. That's what I see. I see a lot of people who are going through the stages of grief, but that last stage of grief, that's action. That's where they are. They're figuring out how to take action and actually move forward.
And at the end of our conversation, I'll have you tell people exactly where they can go to join. But there was something else in the new manual that you had for Resistance 2.0 I really liked. It was
Yeah,
organizing to stand indivisibly with communities under threat. And that MAG is going to come for each community.
that's
And if
right.
we to turn our back on any vulnerable community, that's what they want. So they can pick them off. Instead, we have to stand united. What I'm getting at really is we're seeing now the increased attack on transgender Americans. And you see some Democrats going, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about that much. First of all, they're just living their lives. It's the Republicans who talk about them, but we cannot turn our back on a vulnerable community. I'm Muslim. If people turned their back on us in 2016, no one would have went to the airport. I refuse. I'd rather lose and turn our back, but I don't think we don't have to lose and turn our back. I think we can win by turning into communities and saying, let's stand together. So what is your take on this?
1,000% correct. The reason why we called this indivisible to begin with, the whole reason was because we understood that the GOP playbook, the Trump playbook, was a divide and conquer playbook. The entire plan is to say, hey, everybody, we're going to go after this marginalized community. Now we're going to go after this marginalized community. Now we're going to go after this marginalized community.
Yeah.
And it's Muslims, it's refugees, it's immigrants, it's trans people. They will pick us off one by one. And we can either wait our turn to be the targeted group, or we can treat an attack on one like an attack on all and fight back. And you know what? That works because the marginal voters who gave Trump power were not given him power to go after trans folks or to go after Muslims or to go after immigrants or refugees. That's not why they gave him power. They wanted lower prices for their eggs. My God, that's what they were voting for. So to say, I'm going to reach out to somebody who's angry about the price of their groceries by greenlighting Republican attacks on trans kids, and that's my smart political strategy, good freaking luck. You are destined to lose electorally and do so in the most morally abhorrent way. It is strategic and morally responsible to stick together in this moment and say, we are the majority. We are actually representing majority interests. We are going to stand up for each other. And when you do that, that builds towards a win because you expose them for what they are. These are extremists in the minority who are looking to line their own pockets and divide us and turn us against each other on their path to doing that. But we can stop that by
Mm-hmm.
simply, as we say, as standing indivisible together.
In your manual too, you talk about certain action items. One is say no to Project 2025, which I think we're all on board with that, but also play hardball and
Yeah.
on local levels as well as city and
Yes.
state. And before we started, you quoted from, I think it was Timothy Snyder,
Yeah.
a quote. What was the quote? Because I think it was so instructive.
So, I mean, Timothy Snyder, this is a quote for folks who don't know, he's a historian. He wrote the book on tyranny and many other books. He's got a very active newsletter as well, and it's quite insightful. But gave an interview shortly after the election in which he was reflecting on what happened and what was to come. And he explicitly said, they want you to be alone. Nobody's going to fix this on their own. That's not how this works. And that is core to how we're thinking about the moment that we're in. It was true in 2017. What is different headed into 2025 is actually where our power is. Some
Hmm.
of us will have power at the national level. We'll have members of Congress who can be pushed, or members of Congress who can be cheered on. But some of us don't have that. Some of us have MAGA members of Congress who really will never care what you think, and you showing up at their office isn't going to shift their opinion. But in 2017, there were six Democratic trifecta states. By Democratic trifecta states, I mean states that had a Democratic governor and Democratic state legislature. Headed into 2025, we have 15 of those states. It's an enormous shift in power that we have at the state and local level. We ought to be using that power. What we
Hmm.
ought to be asking our governors and our mayors and our state legislatures in these states is, what are you doing proactively to push back against this agenda? I was talking to Indivisibles in Massachusetts statewide, not normally a battleground for us, right?
Right.
We have good representation in Congress in Massachusetts. Senator Elizabeth Warren kicked off the call, launching the new Indivisible guide. We have good friends in the Massachusetts delegation. What they can do is not just cheer on their national representatives, they should be pushing their governor and their state legislatures to actively stand as a bulwark against what is coming from Trump 2.0. And what I want to see Democratic state attorneys general out competing each other for what they can do. I want to see governors in those blue states out competing each other. No, I am pushing back more against Trump. No, I am pushing back more against MAGA 2.0. That's what I want to see. And in order for them to get there, they need to understand that their constituents are asking for this. So if you are in California, if you're in New York, if you're in Illinois or Washington, Oregon, my God, you have such a big opportunity right now to stand up for democracy and for folks who are under threat.
I think that's great. And I'm glad you gave like sort of a homework for people in the blue states who think like, well, we're safe here, but also what can we really do for the rest? The governors can play a role. And some governors have been outspoken. And Democrat, the one thing I can tell you, I can share, Ezra, from phone calls, Democrats want fighters. That was
Yeah.
a word over and over that happened in the past, but now more than ever. Like I've heard nonstop, if there's one through line, and people could debate, should we be more moderate or more liberal? That's not really coming up to much, honestly, from callers to the show. It's more we want fighters. Before we wrap up,
Yeah.
like, what is your reaction to those? You have some Democrats now who tend to be in the center who are like, we should move to where I am. I'm like, did we lose the election in 2024 because we were too liberal? Did I miss something? Where was the progressive policies that was? I mean, Vice President Harris was the candidate for 100 days. It was unfair for her to define an entire agenda. So she barely could. But I didn't see us move to the left slightly with her, but not really. We were still in the middle, I thought.
Look, I mean, this happens in Democratic circles literally every single time there's a national election, Democrats lose. Immediately, what they go to do is, oh, it's the lefties or it's the groups
Yeah.
or whatever it is. Very little on it's APAC, who pump more money into Democratic primaries than any other national organization. Very little. It's like the corporate PACs that are buying elections everywhere throughout the country. It is always these scrappy grassroots lefty groups that suddenly, oh, those are the ones that cost us the election. I do think I look, I'm a progressive.
Right.
I believe in progressive economics. I believe we ought to be delivering for folks. I would love to say, if only Kamala Harris had adopted my ideological views, she would have won. And I can't say that with a straight face. I don't think
No.
ultimately this election was about whether she was too moderate or she was too lefty. I think you can debate specific issue areas. That's all well and good. But ultimately, when you see a global trend for the first time in history against incumbents, and you see that she is associated with the incumbent party, you kind of have to come to the conclusion that ultimately folks do not trust the system to deliver for them. So when
Yeah.
you're hearing that folks want fighters in the Democratic Party, that's exactly right. They want people who believe that these representatives or these candidates are actually going to get in there and make some noise and fight for them. That's what they're looking for. That was clear back in 2017 too.
I remember that.
Indivisibles, yes, there are progressive Democrats, there are independents, there are former Republicans and non-MAGA Republicans, ideologically somewhat diverse, but what aligned all of our Indivisible group members from early on was this desire to see their representatives fight back against what they saw was a clear and present danger to American democracy.
I could not agree with you more. So, Ezra, last thing, if people want to sign up, if they find out if there's a chapter by them or to
Yeah.
start their own chapter, where can they go?
You just go to indivisible.org. This is not led by me. This is led by thousands of Indivisible leaders all over the country who decide to raise their hands. If there is a group in your area, please find them, join them. If there is one in your area and you're like, oh, I'd like to start my own anyway, great. We have multiple Indivisible groups in many counties or cities. That's fine. We're here to support you. We want you to build your power, and we're going to do this together. As Timothy Snyder says, nobody fixes this on their own.
No, and Indivisible is like Democratic Fight Club. So Ezra's a Tyler Durden of,
Oh, but the first rule about Indivisible is you talk about Indivisible.
right. You have to. And the second rule is talk about it. And third is bring some friends to it. And then fourth is you got to fight. So,
That's right.
all right, Ezra, thanks so much, my friend. And I look forward to chatting with you. Now, we're back in the battle, Resistance 2.0. Look forward to you and other people from your organization back on the show more regularly.
Love it. I'll see you soon, Dean.
Take care.